That's the clear choice Canadians are going to be faced with in the next election. Do we invest in a stronger future? Or do we pull back and say, no, government shouldn't be doing any of that? It's not about political popularity. It's about doing the right thing to set every generation up for success for the coming decades. And that's what we're going to continue to do.
The Prime Minister's response there to a question from a reporter today that asked essentially, if your budget policies are popular, why aren't you? Here's what the polls show. When asked if specific budget measures were good or bad for Canada, the majority thought several key budget policies would be good for the country, including spending $8.5 billion to build 3.9 million new housing units by 2031, the $900 million for greener homes and energy efficiency programs, and boosted defense spending, along with the hike to the capital gains tax. But the government has not translated those policies and the popularity of them, according to that poll, to a boost in support. Leger found almost half of Canadians had a negative opinion of the budget at 49%. And Angus Reid reporting this week that Canadians prefer Pierre Poilievre over Justin Trudeau as Prime Minister by nearly 20 points. Let's bring back the front bench to talk about why that may be. Christy Clark, John Tory, and Tom Mulcair are here. John, I'll start with you. Why is that, do you think?
Well, because it's too early to tell. I mean, you know, I would say if we were looking at trends on that very same poll you just showed, is the number who are unsure about best Prime Minister, for example, gone up? Because people don't go straight from saying they've given up on the Liberals and gone to the Conservatives and then come straight back 2 days or 10 days after a budget. They will go through a transition period, if they go through one at all, which they may not, and they will end up, perhaps back in the Liberal camp, but they don't go straight from one place to the other. But I mentioned to our producer that I ran into a pollster in the subway today, quite literally, and I gave out my theory, which has been borne out in many, many different kinds of campaigns I've been involved in, or pre-campaigns, which is that if you have 65% of people thinking your housing program and your budget is great, and you're at 21% in the polls, there's bound to be some pulling up that happens with you, even if it's 3 points to pull you up, because there are some of those people say that's a great housing program. And he looked at me and he said, yep, you're right, that's worked all the time, and there's one problem. And I said, what's that? And he said, it's about them. And, not about the policies. People have just sort of had it. And that's what he said. Now, it remains to be seen whether that's true or not. And that's why I think they have skillfully picked this number of 5 points that they have to make up, which is pretty small out of the gap, and said it's till June, because they're giving themselves the time that it takes to have that transition start to happen. And it'll either happen or it won't. And if it won't, well, we'll have this discussion again, I'm sure. If it does, then, then you can say, well, they've got a bit of momentum. 5 points is 5 points. And if it comes off the Conservatives, that's a closing of the gap by 10. So I'm just saying it's too early to draw conclusions based on even those polling numbers you showed.
Yeah, I totally get the point around timing, Christy, in how early it is. The only caveat I guess I would add is that this wasn't just a week after the budget was introduced. It's been a month since they started making announcements about what they were going to do in the budget. And they front-loaded a lot of those more significant ones that we showed were people recognize them enough at this point to say, we do endorse them, we do support them. And yet it hasn't transferred at all to the government. Do you anticipate it still could?
Well, as you know, and I say this all the time, every week, I think when we talk about polls, I'm not a big believer that we should be analyzing, there's a lot to be gained from deeply analyzing polls at this stage, because they change so much over time. But it's pretty stinky. Like, there's a lot of stinky polls coming in, and it does suggest that there is a serious malaise out there. While I still don't give Trudeau zero chance of winning the election, because he really only needs a small plurality to get there, I think this is getting tougher for them. And the reason I think, when you look at it, is you see these Gen X, Gen Z, I guess, voters who are looking at the world and saying, okay, look, hang on a second. There will be no money left for me. There will be no healthcare left for me. Where will the government be paying? How will they be paying for any of these things when they're spending it all? And it really is a question of generational fairness. Baby boomers, people who are older than that even today, are going to be getting a lot of the benefits of a healthcare system that's still functioning, and as that very large population finds its way through the system, it's going to continue to eat up more money. These Gen Zers are not dumb. They see it. And I think that is a pretty profound problem for the Trudeau government, because they've really relied on that voter group to vote for them. And I'm just going to say this, Vassy, because as soon as the last segment aired, I got texts from a bunch of people. They said, just remind everybody that the Kinder Morgan pipeline was bought by the federal government, by taxpayers' money, because government policy forced it basically into bankruptcy and the private sector had to leave.
Yeah, I mean, the private sector walked away because they said that it was basically too hard to build it, and then the government went and bought. I mean, both those.
There should have been no
things are
money
true.
needed to do that from taxpayers.
Right.
Just had to get that in there.
Tom, no, I know. I gathered you were. I thought about adding it at the end of the last panel, but then was worried about time. So, Tom, I wanted to get your take on the sort of disparate polling numbers and a little bit of what Christy said there. I think that there is a tension. Like, you hear the way the government frames this about generational fairness and the investments that they say they're making in order to address that question. But then there's the other sort of subsect of the population saying what Christy is, which is, well, actually, the amount you're spending will hurt us as that generation in the long run. What do you think the political calculation is there?
I think the political calculation is a bit balkety because they continue to convince themselves that if they make more announcements and they get Mr. Trudeau to say more and more that what Canadians must want in their hearts of hearts is more Justin Trudeau, they're not listening. Mr. Trudeau has been using that line, for example, as he starts going after Pierre Poilievre on very deep philosophical differences between the two parties. And the essential core message from Trudeau is, what you really need is more of me. And what Canadians are saying is, we want you guys to move along. There's a surliness there that's not just with the younger generations, but it is especially with them because they've got such massive debt coming through university, Vassy. Today, it's unbelievable how much they have as a debt that they carry with them. And they realize that their chances of owning a house are really slim. And this is the same Justin Trudeau who less than 8 months ago in Hamilton said, this is not the responsibility of the federal government, and then decided that it was because he was in trouble politically. Yeah, and so I think that the average voter is capable of seeing through that. To put it another way, we do not in this country have the 2 4-year term rule that the Americans have for the president. But you know what? In some respects, we kind of do. It's just like the best before date has long passed, and no matter what button Mr. Trudeau pounds on his dashboard, there's still tons of red flashing lights saying, your time's up. You're going to, if your party's going to have a chance, you got to give the chance to someone like Chrystia Freeland or Mark Carney to give this thing a twirl, because you're not going to be able to get it done. I think that that's the bottom line, frankly.
We didn't even get a chance to talk about Mark Carney and his comments this week, but maybe we will soon. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you, all three of you, for the discussion tonight. I really appreciate it. Tom Mulcair, Christy Clark, and John Tory. Our takeaway here